Hi there guys, and welcome to this, the first battle report in our Midgard campaign. Now, a couple of things before we start. This bat rep is done in a different format, mainly because I filmed the initial battle report and I really wasn't happy with the footage we had. You really couldn't see what was going on. I'd misaligned the camera, so I've redone it in a different style. Would be really interested to get your feedback on what you think. Again, just let me know in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you want to see more like this? Suggestions of how I could do it better in the future? Things like that. The battle report is played with our Necromunda solo rules, which again you can download at the link below. There's also a Let's Play somewhere on this channel where you can go and just see me play through the solo rules on there as well to get an idea. But again, there's a link below where you can go download them for free. So if you want to grab a copy of those, please go and grab them. Apart from that, guys, enjoy the bat rep. Hope you follow us for the campaign. Okay, so that's the introduction done. Without further ado, let's get this started.
This was definitely proving harder than it was supposed to be. The mission had been simple. The Inquisitor, or Corvin as most of his acolytes called him, had briefed them himself. And while the briefing itself had lasted more than an hour, the 5-second version was basically go to the Worldspine, find the Ork command location, call in the Talon, and extract. Simple. Having finally noticed this planet following Corvin's dispatch of couriers to the closest planets on the other side of the Null Zone, word had arrived back a few months ago that the Imperium had dispatched the Dark Wolf Space Marine chapter to bring about Midgard's compliance with the Imperial Creed. The Dark Wolves were well known for having a preference for surgical strikes based on complete intelligence, rather than the brute force assaults favoured by so many of their brother chapters. As a result, they liked to amass as much intelligence as they could on a potential war zone before committing troops to it. For this reason, they were a favoured tool of the Inquisition, as they could be relied upon to make minimal mess while still achieving the required result. Corvin, who had been on the planet for the last 2 years studying the strange effects which had kept it out of Imperial sight for so long, wanted to make sure he had as much intelligence as he could to give them when they arrived. Which they would in just a couple of days. Which was why Midden and his strike team found themselves out in the Worldspine Mountains in such a mess. As is so often the case, once on the ground, things hadn't been as simple as they seemed in the briefing room. The problem itself was straightforward enough to define. There were bloody orcs everywhere. The place was teeming with them. Midden and his crew had been stopping every few minutes, or so it seemed, to avoid another group of them, and so were well behind schedule. It also seemed that rather being a united group, as Corvin had hoped, the Orcs of the Mountains consisted of so many different tribes that finding one central stronghold seemed slightly optimistic. Added to that, what little intake they'd been able to gather from an overhead sweep upon insertion pointed to the probability that the damn thing was underground, so wasn't exactly obvious to the eye, and they could hardly ask anyone for directions. Or could they? It actually seemed that the only way they were actually going to achieve this was to capture one of the greenskins and do just that. Just as they'd made the plan, however, things had gone ploin-shaped. They'd been tracking an Ork Patrol and were just preparing to ambush when a particularly nasty-looking fellow decided to take a leak right on Electra's position. Her response had been predictable, brief, and brutal. But the result was they now had God knows how many of the angry green brute bearing down on their position. On the bright side, if they could capture a few of them, surely one of them would be able to give them some information. So the way this is going to work today is the orcs are deploying using blinds. So what you do first of all, you divide the gang down into kind of groups of 2 to 3 models. So here we've got 3 groups. 2 models here, we've got the orc with 2 pistols, an orc with a shooter, orc with the shooter, and orc with the heavy stubber or the big shooter, and the leader with the 2 close combat boys over here. Now what you do then, you get some counters. So what we've got is for, this is group number 1, this is group number 2, and this is group number 3. Now what we need to do then is we need numbers that are going to represent them on the actual board themselves. So these tokens down here are the blinds. So what we've got another 1, 2, and 3, which is going to obviously equate to that group. And then we've got 3 other numbers which don't equate to any group. So what happens is we're going to flip all these upside down. These will all get deployed over the battlefield. And then as they get detected, you flip it over. Ah, that's a 3. Okay, so group number 3 gets revealed at that point, or within an inch of that marker. They have to deploy within an inch of the number 3. If it's the number 4, then obviously that's a blind, and that's nothing. So that then signifies that just gets thrown aside. The marker gets missed. But the idea is here that me, as the player, I don't know exactly where the threat's coming from. So I might think the orcs are launching a massive strike down the right-hand flank, for example, but it turns out that it's these 3 blinds and the actual orcs coming up the middle, because these 3 counters are coming up the middle. So it's designed to kind of confuse things a bit and remove that godlike knowledge that I have as a player, especially when playing solo. So here when it comes to deploying, what we do is we take the 6 counters which are going to be blinds and we mix them up nicely. So I don't know which is which. I don't know which are the real ones and which are the blinds. Then we just deploy as normal. So I'm just going to roll the dice. Again, a 1 to 2, the orcs will deploy over to the left-hand side primarily. A 3 or 4, they deploy in the middle. And a 4, 5 or 6, they're going to deploy most of their forces over onto the right-hand side. So again, it works exactly the same as a normal mission now for deployment. It's just that I don't know which of these blips actually is the real threat. The orcs advanced in what would have been a standard sweep and clear pattern, except that I imagine the orcs had no idea what a sweep and clear pattern was and were simply moving towards where they thought we were. This suited me just fine, as they were clearly unaware we were positioning to deliver a powerful left hook. At this point, several things happened at once. One of the orcs obviously tripped a sensor, and the perimeter alarm started ringing. We all immediately hit the deck, more out of instinct than because we perceived any real threat from the alarm. But upon hearing the alarm, the orcs suddenly powered forward, charging towards our position at a speed which quite belied their huge, ungainly frames. Despite having seen the brutes move like this on several occasions, their agility continues to surprise and scare me in equal measure. I was just picking myself up when Atarine calmly updated over the noise of the alarms that the orcs' numbers had increased, or more likely I thought her scanner had been picking up ghost returns. But her scanner was now reading 1 additional orc out there. Great, I mumbled to myself. Just what we need. Out on our right flank, there was a sound like a grenade going off, but when I looked over, I could see nothing which could have actually caused the noise. Were we being flanked? I got Electra on the Vox. She infiltrated forward as soon as it became obvious we were in for a fight, or as soon as she'd brutally taken care of the first orc and started the fight. And she was taking a position on the old shack in front of us, and had much better lines of sight than the rest of us. She confirmed there had been an explosion, but likewise could see no movement out there. I put it out of my mind. I was sure we'd find out either way soon enough. Boss, they're really close, said Atarine, the ping of her biospanner clearly audible over the Vox. I know, I replied. I mean it. I know. And I did. The orcs were really close to us, and we still hadn't managed to spot a single one. This didn't bode well. Now, I enjoy shooting orcs as much as the next guy, but usually like to do it from a distance. Getting up close and personal with them wasn't my idea of fun. Well, it wasn't going to be my day. Just as the Vox bead clicked off in my ear, An ear-splitting howl rent the air, and 3 orcs emerged from the bushes right in front of me. Again, moving at that impossible speed, they caught me completely flat-footed, and even before I had a chance to react, they were upon me, snarling and biting. One brute, armed with a massive stubber-type weapon, swung it at me as if it were an axe. I twisted at the last minute and it deflected off my armour. His mate, another pig-ugly brute, dropped the ridiculously oversized gun on his shoulder, instead coming at me with his teeth and claws. Luckily for me, he was in such a rage he forgot to draw the knife at his belt, as if he had, I'd be dead. As it was, my armour was more than proof against his teeth. As he bit into the armour on my arm, I brought my bolt gun up one-handed and blew his guts out, even as his jaws remained closed around my vambrace. I had to shake the damn thing off, even after it was good and dead. There was still one boy left, slower than his 2 mates, but with the greenskin still stubbornly refusing to let go of my arm, no matter how hard I tried to shake off his dead form, I couldn't get out of his way. I heard Luanu on the Vox, "Warawante, down!" I threw myself to the ground again, and the 3rd orc boy suddenly disappeared in a hail of las rounds. Despite following our chief scout's instructions to the word, many of his las bolts passed just a few inches over my prone form. I decided to have a few words with Luanu after we got out of this mess, and just double-check his sights were properly zeroed. When I looked up, I saw the orc boy hideously wounded, rolling around on the floor in agony. However, I knew from bitter experience how quickly these brutes recovered, and put all my focus back into finishing off the one still looming over me. The momentary distraction of seeing his 2 mates felled at his side gave me all the opportunity I needed. My earlier movement, avoiding the fire of Luanu, had fouled his incoming attack, and once again my armour saved me. This allowed me the opportunity I needed, and, springing up once more, I managed to put a metre or 2 between us. It was more than enough. I swung up my weapon and unloaded the rest of the clip into the beast's midriff. Despite the incredible stopping power of the self-propelled bolts, I succeeded only in blowing chunks out of the greenskin and forcing it back into cover, but it remained breathing and a threat. Still, at least there was now some distance between myself and it. Atarine came onto the Vox again and said in a clipped Ganger accent, "Seems our flanks are secure. I've just cleaned up the signal on this piece of crap scanner, and it was just signal interference." "What the?" The transmission ended abruptly in a hail of gunfire, and another mass of howls, another mob of orcs, even bigger than the brutes who had just charged at me, burst out of cover. At almost point-blank range, they emptied their rapid-fire pistols into a horribly exposed Atarine. She stood shocked and looked down at herself in surprise. Not a single shot had found its mark. Whilst Atarine was still trying to comprehend the fact she was still alive, a single shot ran out from behind her, and one of the boys who was charging her down was blown backwards with a gaping hole in his chest. "Welcome, you are, little one," came Electra's voice over the Vox. Rather than slowing the orcs down, however, this simply seemed to enrage the other 2, and they put on a sudden burst of speed, bringing them even closer to the stunned hacker's position. Atarine finally came to her senses, and looking up at the approaching orcs, did the most sensible thing she could, in my opinion. She legged it, firing a few shots over her shoulder as she went, but more for effect than because she had any chance of hitting anything. Denied their first target, the orcs spied Karana, nestled behind a rock in front of them, and spurred forward, desperate to engage something, leaving themselves dangerously exposed to enfilade fire as they did. As they did so, the orc to Karana's right also emerged from his hiding position, desperate to trap the Elder in a deadly crossfire. Karana simply rose up from behind the rock majestically, his 2 pistols held out at right angles. His las pistol sent a beam of superheated light towards the emerging orc boy on his right, sending him scrambling for cover, and the orc boss, a huge example of his species, simply crumpled as the toxins from the needle pistol in Karana's left hand got to work. Out of ammo on the needle pistol, he smoothly holstered it, drawing his other las pistol before stalking off in the direction of the madly thrashing orc boss. determined to finish him off before he could recover from the toxins flowing around his system. He would be denied his prize, however, by an Ork boy moving in from his right under the escarpment, who unleashed an incredible amount of surprisingly accurate firepower in his direction and forced our Xenos back into cover. Back on our left flank, Vor saw the Ork Luana had winged earlier and moved in to finish him off. The last I saw of him, he was charging in, his sword raised high, berserker expression on his face. After that I heard a grunt, and no more. "Vor," I barked. "Vor, answer me." Silence. Shit. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to check what was going on, as there was an Ork boy still skulking behind the escarpment, readying himself to rush in on our close to overloaded right flank. I swung around the shack and took him completely by surprise. Again, my bolt gun barked, and the Ork literally disintegrated in front of me as the explosive bolts got to work. Before I had time to feel any satisfaction, however, from behind me I heard a dismayed yelp, and turned to see the Ork which Vor had just charged down running for the hills, having just witnessed his companion's grisly fate. What had become of Vor, however, I still had no idea. Just at that moment, over the roar of the firefight, I heard Electra gasp, and wild cheers erupt from the Ork boy behind the bush to my left, as she went down hard under a lucky shot from his pistol. From here, things really started getting interesting. Vor suddenly announced his presence on the left flank, enraged by the injury to Electra and despite bleeding profusely from a wound in his midriff. The target of his ire? The Ork, who just a moment ago had been cheering, was now looking distinctly worried as the feral world barbarian charged him down. The Ork managed a few hapless shots in Vor's direction, but due to his panic and the fact he was an Ork, they all went wide. The Ork turned to flee and ran headfirst into the tree behind it, knocking itself clean out. The impact dislodged one of the hard fruit in the tree's branches, which came sailing down and cracked Vor hard on the top of the head, felling him as if he were a puppet whose strings had been cut. Both bodies lay there totally unconscious, locked in a diabolical lover's embrace, covered in juice from whatever fruit it was. I just hoped the Ork stayed in that state long enough for us to finish this mess and capture him, and that the juice covering Vor's head was from the fruit and not his own broken melon. This did, however, leave our left flank empty of any threat, and so we were free to concentrate entirely on the few Orks remaining on the right. Few, but stubborn. These Orks would prove difficult to shift. We poured a hail of fire into the crawling Ork boss and the remaining boy left in the open under the archway of the escarpment, killing the Ork boy in a matter of seconds, but doing no appreciable damage to the boss, who was a tough brute if ever there was one. "There's still one hiding behind the rocks," Atarine cried out, as the remaining Ork boy, having just witnessed the last of his band wiped out in front of his eyes, and now watching his boss crawl numbly towards him, threw caution to the wind and charged, howling out of cover, auto pistols firing. If I'm honest, I'd not been aware of this boy's presence, and it was only Atarine's warning which drew my attention to him at all, so busy raking fire into the Ork boss was I. Karana, who was just standing up, recovering from his wound done to him earlier, was caught in the charging Ork's barrage of fire and went down again, this time to a nasty-looking wound in the thigh. By this point we were all running low on ammo, and I could see the crew were starting to tire. I ordered Liwanu and Atarine to resupply, and they started tossing out ammo to the rest of us. We reloaded and levelled our guns. The Ork boy charged. The Ork boss looked up, the haze of toxin clearing from his eyes. My bolter spoke, and from over my shoulder Electra's long rifle rang out. Both Orks lay dead. That eerie silence hung in the air as the light breeze slowly cleared the smoke from the scene in front of us. Atarine ran over to check Karana's wounds, and despite my misgivings quickly confirmed that both wounds had merely grazed him. With a bit of attention, our Xenos companion would be back on his feet in no time. From behind me I heard a rumbling laugh, and I turned to see Vor, unconscious Ork dragging behind him, face covered in the juice of whatever fruit it was. "At least we're not going to go hungry in these mountains," he chuckled. This stuff's really good, leveraging a large piece of the fruit into his mouth and spilling juice from his smiling face everywhere as he did so.
Okay, so that's that. Meaden and the crew managed to capture the Ork, and hopefully now we'll have some clues as to where the Ork stronghold is so they can extract in the Talon and get the hell out of Dodge. As I say, I would love you to join us for the campaign. This is the first part of what is going to become our Midgard campaign. The idea there is that we're going to link Necromunda, 40k, Aeronautica, Gorka Morka, and a load of other games that I probably don't even know exist yet. Link them all into a kind of a narrative campaign, which is played solo, which can be linked up so I can play with my brother and hopefully, a few other people remotely is the idea in these times that we have. Let's see, it's a work in progress. We'll see how we go, but that's the idea. So again, if you want to follow on with that, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, all that usual jazz. I will see you guys in the next video.